when billionaire heir Julian March cancels his $2 million wedding after a chance encounter with climate scientist Renee Caldwell, two worlds collide and ignite a firestorm of scandal, transformation, and a battle for redemption. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The elegant ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in San Francisco buzzed with excitement. Men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses mingled, champagne glasses in hand. At the center of it all stood Julian March, heir to the March global shipping empire, his perfect smile hiding his growing anxiety. "Only 3 more days until the big day," said Richard March, slapping his son on the back. "The merger with the Whitley Group will be finalized the day after the wedding. 2 dynasties united at last." Julian nodded, adjusting his tie. At 32, he had everything most men would dream of: good looks, billions in the bank, and a beautiful fiancée from one of America's wealthiest families. Yet something felt hollow. "You look like you could use another drink," said Victoria Whitley, his soon-to-be wife, approaching in a stunning red dress. "Daddy just told me the honeymoon villa in Santorini has been upgraded. 6 bedrooms, private beach, staff of 12. "Sounds perfect," Julian replied automatically. Victoria frowned slightly. "You could at least pretend to be excited. This wedding is costing over $2 million. Before Julian could respond, his assistant Ben approached urgently. "Mr. March, sorry to interrupt, but don't you have that TED Talk you wanted to attend? It starts in 20 minutes at the Masonic Auditorium." Julian checked his watch. "You're right, I completely forgot." Victoria rolled her eyes. "A TED Talk? Now? We have dinner with the wedding planner in an hour. It's about climate resilience. Could give us some good PR angles for the company," Julian said, already backing away. "I'll be back in time, I promise." He escaped to the waiting car, loosening his tie and taking a deep breath. The truth was, he had been looking forward to this particular talk all week. It was his one excuse to step away from the suffocating wedding preparations. The Masonic Auditorium was packed when Julian slipped into a seat in the front row. The lights dimmed, and a tall black woman in a simple navy dress walked confidently onto the stage. Her hair was pinned back neatly, emphasizing her striking features. "Dr. Renee Caldwell," the moderator announced, "leading researcher in climate resilience and sustainable coastal community rebuilding." Julian leaned forward, immediately captivated by her presence. "I was 13 when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans," Renee began, her voice clear and strong. "I watched as my childhood home disappeared under 8 feet of water. My father, a carpenter, spent the next 5 years rebuilding homes for others, but we never had the money to properly rebuild our own." As she spoke, Julian felt something stir inside him. She wasn't just reciting facts and figures. She was sharing a lived experience, a passionate mission born from personal tragedy. "The shipping industry is one of the largest contributors to ocean pollution and coastal erosion," she continued, her eyes seeming to land directly on Julian. "The very communities most vulnerable to climate disasters are being destroyed by corporate interests that prioritize profit over people." Julian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His family's ships traversed every ocean, and he knew exactly how lax their environmental standards were. Cost-cutting was family tradition. "If we wait for the world to care, it will be too late," Renee said, her voice rising with conviction. "But if one person acts, just one brave heart, it can ripple across oceans." Those words struck Julian like a physical blow. When the lights came up, he joined the applause mechanically, but inside something had cracked open, a truth he had been avoiding for years. He wasn't just marrying Victoria, he was surrendering to a life he had never chosen. Back at his penthouse apartment, Julian paced the floor all night. By morning, his decision was made. With shaking hands, he wrote a letter and placed it beside Victoria's engagement ring on his bedside table. Across town, Renee Caldwell was packing her briefcase in her modest hotel room, preparing to fly back to her research center in Louisiana. Her TED Talk had gone well, but now it was back to the real work. She had no idea that her words had just changed the course of someone's life. Victoria Whitley's scream echoed through the March family mansion. "He did what?" Richard March bellowed, reading the letter his son had left. "Cancel the wedding. 3 days before. Has he lost his mind?" Victoria collapsed into a chair, mascara streaming down her face. He says he can't go through with it, that he needs to find his own path. Richard crumpled the letter in his fist. This is about the company. He never wanted to take over. Well, too bad. The merger contracts are already drawn up. Do you think there's someone else? Victoria's mother asked quietly. Victoria looked up, her sadness hardening into anger. If there is, I'll destroy her. At the University of New Orleans, Renee adjusted her glasses as she addressed a lecture hall filled with environmental science students. The models show accelerated erosion along the Gulf Coast. At current rates, we'll lose another 40 square miles of Louisiana coastline in the next decade. From the back of the room, a door opened. Renee glanced up, then froze mid-sentence. The man from the front row of her TED Talk was standing there, watching her intently. What was his name? She had Googled him after noticing his March shipping name badge. Julian March, the billionaire heir. Recovering quickly, she continued her lecture, though her heart was racing inexplicably. When the students filed out, he approached the podium. Dr. Caldwell, I'm Julian March. I know who you are, she replied coolly. Your company's oil tankers have spilled over 2 million gallons into the Gulf in the past decade. He didn't flinch. You're right, and I want to change that. Renee gathered her papers. Mr. March, if you want to make a donation to our research center, you can contact the development office. I don't want to make a donation, Julian said, stepping closer. I want to learn. Your talk. It changed something in me. I've spent my whole life following a path that was laid out before I was born. I want to find my own way, and I think that starts with understanding your work. Renee studied him skeptically. And this sudden interest in coastal erosion has nothing to do with the fact that your wedding was just cancelled. Yes, it's all over the news. Julian looked down, embarrassed. I won't lie, hearing you speak was the catalyst, but this isn't some impulsive reaction. This is the first honest decision I've made in years. Well, Mr. March, I'm not in the business of providing therapy to runaway grooms, especially ones whose family business is destroying what I'm trying to save. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her. My family doesn't know where I am. I've walked away from everything, because for the first time I heard someone speak about purpose with such clarity that it made my own life look like a shadow. Renee turned back, seeing something unexpected in his eyes, not entitlement or arrogance, but genuine searching. I have a meeting with local fishermen tomorrow morning, she said finally. Their livelihoods are being threatened by coastal erosion. If you want to learn, be at the marina at 6 a.m. Don't be late and don't wear those shoes. She nodded toward his Italian leather loafers, worth more than her monthly salary. After she left, Julian stood in the empty lecture hall, feeling both terrified and more alive than he had in years. At the March shipping headquarters, Richard March slammed his fist on the conference table. Find him, I don't care how. He can't just disappear 3 days before the biggest merger in company history. The private investigator nodded. We've tracked his credit card to New Orleans, last used yesterday at a hotel downtown. Richard narrowed his eyes. New Orleans? What the hell is he doing there? Victoria, sitting silently at the table, pulled out her phone and searched Julian March, New Orleans. A news article appeared. March hair spotted at University of New Orleans following wedding cancellation. She scrolled down to a grainy photo of Julian entering a lecture hall. The caption read, Environmental Science Building, where Dr. Renee Caldwell was giving a lecture on coastal erosion. Victoria's perfectly manicured nail tapped on Dr. Caldwell's name. I think I found our problem. The sun was barely rising over the Mississippi Delta when Julian arrived at the marina. He had traded his designer clothes for khakis and a simple button-down shirt with sturdy boots instead of loafers. Renee was already there, talking with a group of weathered men. She looked surprised to see Julian, but introduced him simply as a student of coastal impact. The day was grueling. They traveled by small boat through marshlands, where fishermen showed them dying oyster beds and receding shorelines. Julian listened intently, asking questions, taking notes. My daddy fished these waters, and his daddy before him, said one old man. Now there's nothing left. The big ships dredge the channels too deep, let the salt water in, kills everything. Julian felt the weight of the man's words. Those were March shipping vessels he was talking about. By the end of the day, Julian's fair skin was sunburned and his hands were blistered from helping pull in crab traps. But he felt a strange satisfaction. As they drove back to the city, Renee finally broke her professional demeanor. "Why are you really here, Mr. March?" "Julian, please." "Fine. Julian, why track me down? Why cancel your wedding? Why any of this?" He was quiet for a moment. "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life?" She laughed shortly. "No, I've only ever had the privilege of fighting for my own. That's what I saw in you on that stage. Someone fighting for something real. I've never fought for anything in my life." Renee shook her head. "So I'm what? Your rebellion against Daddy? Your spiritual awakening?" "You're the person who woke me up," Julian said simply. "And now I need to figure out what I'm going to do about it." They pulled up to her modest house in a neighborhood still showing signs of hurricane damage from years past. "My mother still lives in a flood zone too," Renee said, noticing him looking at the water lines still visible on some houses. "Some people can't just decide to walk away from their lives, Julian." "I know," he said quietly, "but some people should." In her New York office, Victoria Whitley stared at the research her private investigator had compiled on Dr. Renee Caldwell. "Impressive credentials," her father said, reading over her shoulder. "PhD from MIT, turned down positions at Harvard and Stanford to work in Louisiana. But why would Julian throw everything away for this?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Because she got to him." Filled his head with environmental nonsense and guilt about the family business. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Hello, is this the Times-Picayune? I have a juicy story about a certain Dr. Renee Caldwell and her new billionaire boyfriend, Julian March." Renee was in her university office the next morning when her phone began buzzing incessantly. Emails, texts, calls, all asking for comment on her relationship with Julian March. She opened a news website to find her picture splashed across the screen. "March heir cancels billion-dollar wedding for climate scientist." Her stomach dropped. Everything she had worked for, her credibility, her reputation, was about to be buried under tabloid gossip. Just then, Julian appeared in her doorway, looking equally shocked. "Renee, I swear I had nothing to do with this." She turned the computer screen toward him. "No? Then explain why your ex-fiancée is quoted saying you left her after becoming obsessed with Dr. Caldwell and her radical environmental agenda." Julian's face paled. "Victoria did this, I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't help me," Renee snapped. "Do you have any idea what this does to my work? Years of research, fighting to be taken seriously as a black woman in science, all reduced to being the other woman in some rich white boy's crisis." "I'll fix this," Julian promised. "No," Renee said firmly. "You've done enough. Please leave." As Julian reluctantly left her office, Renee's phone rang again. It was the university president. "Dr. Caldwell, we need to talk about this situation. The Board of Trustees is concerned about the attention the university is receiving." Renee closed her eyes. Everything she had worked for was threatening to unravel because a man she barely knew had decided she was his salvation. That evening, Julian sat in his hotel room, watching the news coverage of the scandal he had inadvertently created. His phone rang. His father. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Richard said without preamble. "The Whitley merger is falling apart. Our stock dropped 8% today. Dad, this isn't about a woman. This is about me finally making my own choices. By chasing after some environmental crusader, she's using you, Julian, for money, for publicity." Julian hung up, then dialed another number. It took several tries before Renee answered. "Please, just listen," he said quickly before she could hang up. "I'm calling a press conference tomorrow. I'll make it clear that we have no relationship, that my decision to call off the wedding had nothing to do with you personally." "Will that be the truth?" Renee asked quietly. Julian paused. "No, because the truth is, your words did change me, but not in the way they're saying." "Did you fall in love with my work?" Renee asked. "Or did you just want an escape from a life you didn't choose?" The question hung between them, unanswered. "The press conference is at noon tomorrow," Julian finally said. "After that, I'll leave New Orleans if that's what you want." After hanging up, Renee walked to her living room window. Media vans were parked outside her house. She closed the curtains and sank onto her couch, wondering how her life had spiraled so dramatically in just a few days. Her phone rang again, her mother this time. "Baby, are you okay? I'm seeing your face all over the TV." "I'm fine, Mama," Renee lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just a misunderstanding." "Is it true about this rich man leaving his fiancée for you?" "No, Mama. He's just interested in my research." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "You know, your daddy always said your brain would change the world someday. I think maybe it's changing more than you realize." After they hung up, Renee stared at her wall of degrees and awards, all the validation she had ever needed, until now, when suddenly they felt insufficient against the storm of emotions Julian March had brought into her life. Tomorrow would determine whether everything she had built would stand or fall, and despite her anger, she couldn't ignore the voice inside her that had recognized something in Julian, a genuine desire to change, to find purpose. The same thing she had been searching for since the day she watched her childhood home disappear under the floodwaters of Hurricane Katrina. The next morning, camera crews and reporters crowded the entrance of the Riverside Hotel in downtown New Orleans. Inside, Julian paced the conference room, rehearsing what he would say. His assistant, Ben, arranged chairs and tested the microphone. "Are you sure about this?" Ben asked, adjusting Julian's tie. "Your father called me 6 times last night. The board is in panic mode." Julian took a deep breath. "I've never been more sure of anything." At exactly noon, Julian stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing in his face. He spotted Victoria's father in the back of the room, arms crossed and scowling. "Thank you all for coming," Julian began. "I want to address the rumors surrounding my decision to postpone my wedding to Victoria Whitley." He carefully avoided the word cancel, though everyone knew that's what it was. "First, I want to make it absolutely clear that Dr. Renee Caldwell had nothing to do with my personal decision. Any suggestion of a romantic relationship between us is false and damages the reputation of a respected scientist whose work is vital to our coastlines." Julian paused, looking directly into the main camera. "The truth is simpler and entirely my responsibility. I realized I was marrying for the wrong reasons. Family expectation, business advantage, social convenience. Dr. Caldwell's TED Talk about authentic purpose and environmental responsibility made me question the path I was on, but she is not responsible for my choices." A reporter shouted out, "Are you walking away from March Shipping as well?" Julian hesitated. "I'm re-evaluating my role in the company. I believe March Shipping has an opportunity to become a leader in environmental responsibility." From the back of the room, Mr. Whitley called out, "So you're throwing away a century of business tradition for some tree-hugging fantasy?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Julian stood taller. "I'm choosing to bring our company into the future, Mr. Whitley. The oceans are dying and shipping companies like ours bear significant responsibility. That's not fantasy, it's scientific fact." As the press conference ended, Julian spotted a familiar face slipping out a side door, Renee. She had come after all. Their eyes met briefly before she disappeared. Across town, Renee sat in her living room with her best friend and fellow researcher, Maya Johnson. The TV was replaying clips from Julian's press conference. "You have to admit, the man stood up for you," Maya said, munching on potato chips. "And he's not hard on the eyes either." Renee shook her head. "Don't start. He's just trying to clean up the mess he made." "Maybe, or maybe he really is changing." Maya picked up her phone. "Look, your name is already dropping out of the headlines. Now they're calling him the environmental heir instead of the runaway groom." Renee's phone buzzed with a text message from Julian. "Can we talk? I'll understand if you say no." She stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Café Beignet on Royal Street, 7 p.m. That evening, Julian arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table in the back corner. When Renee walked in, several people recognized her, whispering and pointing. She held her head high and joined him. "Thank you for meeting me," Julian said, "and for coming to the press conference." "I stayed in the back. I wanted to hear what you'd say," Renee admitted. "It was decent of you." A waitress brought coffee, her eyes widening as she recognized them. I meant what I said, Julian continued once they were alone. But I also didn't tell the whole truth. Which is, Renee raised an eyebrow, that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you walked on that stage. He leaned forward. Not just your work, though that amazes me, but your conviction, your courage. Renee stirred her coffee slowly. Julian, you don't know me. You're projecting some fantasy onto a stranger because you're running from your real life. Then let me get to know you, he said simply. Not as some escape or rebellion, but because I genuinely want to understand the work you do and the person you are. Renee looked at him skeptically. And how exactly would that work? You go back to your billion-dollar company and I continue my research, and we what? Date? While your ex-fiancé and your father try to destroy my reputation? I'm not going back to New York, Julian said quietly. I've rented an apartment here in New Orleans. I'm taking a leave of absence from March shipping. Renee nearly choked on her coffee. You're serious? Completely. I want to learn about coastal restoration from the ground up. No shortcuts, no buying my way in. And what does your father think about that? Julian's face darkened. He's threatened to remove me from the board if I don't return immediately. The Whitley merger is falling apart without the wedding to seal it. For the first time, Renee saw the real cost of Julian's choice. He wasn't just playing at rebellion. He was risking everything. Why Louisiana? Why not just donate to environmental causes from your penthouse in New York? Julian's eyes met hers, because this is where it matters most, where your work matters most. Renee felt something stir inside her, a dangerous mix of admiration and attraction she couldn't afford to indulge. I've applied to volunteer with the Coastal Restoration Corps, Julian continued. No special treatment. I want to do the actual work. Despite herself, Renee smiled. Those volunteers work in mud up to their knees planting marsh grass for 8 hours a day. I know. I read their website. Twice. Renee shook her head in disbelief. You're either the most dedicated man I've ever met or completely insane. Probably both, Julian admitted with a smile that made Renee's heart beat faster. As they left the cafe, a photographer jumped out from behind a parked car, snapping pictures. Dr. Caldwell? Mr. March, are you two dating now? Julian instinctively stepped in front of Renee, shielding her from the camera. Leave her alone. She's a scientist, not a celebrity. The photographer smirked. Not anymore, she isn't. The next morning, fresh photos of Julian and Renee leaving the cafe appeared in several tabloids with suggestive headlines. Renee's department chair called her into his office. The university is concerned about the attention you're receiving, Dr. Caldwell, he said uncomfortably. Several major donors have expressed reservations about the direction of your research. My research hasn't changed, Renee said firmly. Only the gossip about my personal life. Nevertheless, the board suggests you take a short sabbatical until this blows over. Renee felt her face flush with anger. You mean until I stop associating with Julian March? The department chair looked away. I'm just conveying the board's recommendation. When Renee returned to her office, she found it packed with boxes of mail, some supportive letters, but many containing hate messages, calling her a homewrecker and worse. Her phone rang. Her mother. Baby, you need to come stay with me for a while. These reporters are camped outside my house now too. I'm sorry, Mama, Renee said, fighting back tears. This will blow over soon. Don't you apologize. You haven't done anything wrong. And for what it's worth, I saw that young man on TV. He seems sincere. After hanging up, Renee looked out her window at the university quad where she had taught for years. Everything she had worked for was being threatened because a billionaire had decided to find himself, with her as his guide. Julian's first day with the Coastal Restoration Volunteers was even harder than he'd expected. The July heat was oppressive, the mud thick and unyielding, and the marsh grass had to be planted in precise rows. You're holding up pretty well for a rich boy, said Carlos, the crew leader, as they took a water break. Most newbies quit by lunch. Julian wiped sweat from his face. I'm not quitting. Good, because we need every pair of hands we can get. This section of marsh protects thousands of homes when the hurricanes come. By the end of the day, Julian's hands were blistered, his back ached and his expensive boots were ruined. But looking back at the section of restored marsh, he felt a satisfaction he'd never experienced in any boardroom. As he walked to his car, his phone rang. His father. "The board meeting is tomorrow," Richard said without greeting. "Your final chance to come to your senses before we vote on your removal." "I'm not coming back yet, Dad. This environmental phase has gone on long enough, Julian. Victoria is willing to take you back. The merger can still happen." Julian leaned against his car, exhausted. "It's not a phase. And please tell Victoria I'm sorry. But there won't be a wedding. Ever. Because of this Caldwell woman. What has she done to you?" "She showed me what it means to live with purpose." His father's voice hardened. "Purpose doesn't pay shareholders, Julian. If you don't return, I'll have no choice but to support the vote to remove you." After hanging up, Julian sat in his car for a long time, staring at the marshland stretching to the horizon. For the first time in his life, he was making his own choices, and they might cost him everything he had ever known. Renee was packing up her office when Maya burst in. "Have you seen this?" She thrust her tablet at Renee. On the screen was a video of Julian planting marsh grass alongside other volunteers, mud-covered and exhausted. The reporter's voice narrated, "Julian March, heir to the March shipping fortune, was spotted today working as a volunteer with coastal restoration efforts. Sources close to March say he has taken a leave of absence from the company following his cancelled wedding to Victoria Whitley." The camera zoomed in on Julian's blistered hands as he carefully planted each stem of grass. "This is either the most expensive midlife crisis in history," the reporter continued, "or a genuine change of heart from one of America's wealthiest young executives." Renee couldn't help but feel impressed. Most people in Julian's position would have simply written a check or held a fundraiser. Instead, he was doing the hard, unglamorous work himself. "You have to admit," Maya said, "that's not a man who's just trying to impress a woman for a fling." Renee sighed. "Even if he is sincere, look at what's happening." She gestured to the boxes of hate mail. "My reputation, my career, everything I've worked for is at risk because I'm now the other woman in some tabloid drama." Maya sat down across from her. "Maybe. Or maybe this is bringing more attention to coastal erosion than your research ever could on its own." Renee blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, every major news outlet is now covering Julian March, the billionaire heir who's getting his hands dirty to save the Louisiana coastline. And every one of those stories mentions your research and why it matters." Renee hadn't considered that angle. Could Julian's high profile actually help her cause? Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Hardest day's work of my life, never felt better. Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow, as colleagues?" Renee stared at the message, torn between caution and a growing curiosity about this man who seemed determined to upend his entire life. The next evening, Julian took Renee to a small family restaurant in the 9th Ward, far from the tourist areas where they might be recognized. "My mother's house was 6 blocks from here," Renee said as they were seated. "It took 8 feet of water during Katrina." Julian looked around at the neighborhood, still bearing scars from the hurricane nearly 20 years later. "Is that why you chose this field? Because of Katrina?" Renee nodded. "I was studying biology at Tulane when it hit. Came back to find everything gone. Our house, my father's workshop, photo albums, everything." "I'm sorry," Julian said quietly. "My father was a carpenter. After the waters receded, he helped rebuild over 50 homes in this neighborhood. But the one thing he couldn't fix was the levees, the wetlands that had been destroyed by industrial development. He knew another storm would come eventually." "And that's when you decided to focus on coastal restoration?" Renee nodded. "My father believed in fixing things with his hands. I wanted to fix things with science." Julian was quiet for a moment. "My father believes in fixing things with money or buying new ones." "And what do you believe in?" Renee asked. Julian looked directly at her. "I'm still figuring that out, but I know it's not what I was raised to believe." As they ate, Julian told her about the board meeting scheduled for the next day. "They're voting on whether to remove me from the company. My father has enough proxy votes to make it happen." "Are you going to fight it?" Julian shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe losing my position is the only way to truly start over, to earn my place rather than inherit it." Renee studied him across the table. "You really are serious about all this, aren't you?" More serious than I've ever been about anything. After dinner, they walked along the quiet streets of the old neighborhood. In the fading light, Renee pointed out the watermarks, still visible on some of the buildings. Most people have forgotten, she said softly. But the water doesn't forget. It keeps coming back year after year, taking more land each time. Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. I want to help, Renee. Not just with manual labor, but with real resources. March Shipping has the money and technology to make a difference. Even if they remove you from the board, I still own 30% of the company. They can't take that away. As they reached her car, Julian hesitated. Would it be inappropriate to ask if I can see you again? Not just as colleagues. Renee looked up at him, conflicted. Julian, you've just upended your entire life. I can't be responsible for that. You're not responsible for my choices, he said firmly, but you did inspire them, and I'd like the chance to know you better, if you're willing. Before she could answer, her phone rang. It was Maya. Renee, turn on the news right now, Channel 4. Julian and Renee hurried to a nearby bar where a television was showing the evening news. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, March Shipping announces major environmental initiative. On screen, Richard March stood at a podium looking grave. Today, March Shipping is proud to announce a new $10 million commitment to coastal restoration efforts along the Gulf Coast. This initiative, which we're calling Project Renewal, will focus on rebuilding wetlands damaged by industrial development. Julian stared at the screen in shock. He's trying to steal my idea. This is damage control. The reporter asked, is this initiative connected to your son Julian's recent involvement with coastal restoration? Richard's smile was tight. My son is on a personal journey of discovery. This corporate initiative has been in development for months. Renee turned to Julian. He's lying, isn't he? Julian nodded, his jaw tight with anger. Completely. But he's also desperate. The company stock has dropped 15% since the wedding was cancelled, and I went AWOL. So what now? Now I go to that board meeting tomorrow and fight for the truth. The March Shipping headquarters in downtown New Orleans was an imposing glass tower overlooking the Mississippi River. Julian straightened his tie as he rode the elevator to the top floor. When he walked into the boardroom, conversation stopped abruptly. His father sat at the head of the table, with Victoria and her father seated nearby, a united front. Julian, Richard said coldly, we weren't expecting you. Clearly, Julian replied, taking an empty seat. But as I'm still technically on the board, I have a right to be here. Richard cleared his throat. We were just discussing the new environmental initiative. Yes, I saw the announcement. Interesting timing. Victoria spoke up, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. Julian, darling, we're all so relieved you've gotten this environmental phase out of your system. The board is prepared to welcome you back if you're ready to be serious again. Julian looked around the table at the older men who had been his father's friends and allies for decades. I am serious, more serious than I've ever been, but not about playing the role you've all assigned me. He stood up and walked to the front of the room, pulling up a presentation on the screen. Since you're all suddenly interested in environmental initiatives, let me show you what real coastal restoration looks like. For the next 20 minutes, Julian presented research, Renee's research, on effective wetland rebuilding, showing before and after images of restored areas and the measurable impact on storm surge protection. This isn't about good PR, Julian concluded. It's about survival, for the coastline, for the communities that live there, and ultimately for companies like ours that depend on stable shipping channels. There was a long silence when he finished. Finally, his father spoke. That was very informative, Julian, but it doesn't change the fact that you abandoned your responsibilities to this company. The board will now vote on your continued position. Julian stood tall. Before you vote, let me be clear. If you remove me, I will use my 30% ownership to push for a full environmental audit of all March shipping operations. Every oil spill, every shortcut on emission standards, every violation will become public. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Richard's face reddened with anger. You would damage your own family's company? I would force it to change, Julian replied calmly. The choice is yours. Victoria stood up, her composure cracking. This is all because of her, isn't it? That Caldwell woman has turned you against your own family. Julian shook his head. No, Victoria. She simply showed me what it means to stand for something real, something more important than mergers and stock prices. The board ultimately voted to keep Julian on, but to remove his executive authority. He would remain a major shareholder, but would no longer have operational control. As Julian left the building, his father followed him to the elevator. You're making a mistake, son. This infatuation with environmental causes, with this woman, it won't last. Julian looked at his father with new eyes. You know what won't last, Dad? The Louisiana coastline, if companies like ours don't change how we operate. And that's not something money can fix after it's gone. The elevator doors closed between them, symbolically closing a chapter in Julian's life. Outside, he took a deep breath of the humid New Orleans air. For the first time in his life, he had stood up for something he truly believed in, and it felt right, even with everything he had lost. He pulled out his phone and called Renee. How did it go? She asked. I'm still on the board, but without executive power, it's a start. Julian, I've been thinking about your question last night. He held his breath, waiting. I can't promise anything, Renee continued cautiously, but I'd like to get to know you too, as more than colleagues. Julian smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. That's all I'm asking for. A chance. As he walked through the busy streets, Julian didn't notice the car following him, or the angry eyes of Victoria Whitley watching from the back seat. Follow him, she instructed her driver. I want to know exactly where he goes and who he sees. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped on her phone as she typed a message. Plan B is in motion. We'll destroy her reputation so thoroughly he'll have no choice but to come back to us. Back at her research center, Renee stared at the mock-up of a new informational campaign. For the first time, major news outlets were requesting interviews about coastal erosion. Donations to her research fund had tripled in the past week. Maya poked her head in. CNN wants you for a segment tomorrow morning, and guess what? They want Julian too. The environmental heir and the scientist who inspired him. Renee sighed. I'm a researcher, not a celebrity. You're both now, Maya pointed out, and you're reaching more people than ever before. Renee knew she was right. The publicity surrounding Julian had brought unprecedented attention to her work, but it had also brought scrutiny and suspicion. Her phone rang, the university president. Dr. Caldwell, the board has reconsidered your sabbatical. In light of the increased interest in your work, we'd like you to continue your research and teaching duties. Translation. Now that her connection to Julian March was bringing positive publicity and donations, they wanted her back. I'll need to think about it, Renee replied coolly. After hanging up, she stood by the window, looking out at the marshlands in the distance. Her entire career had been devoted to protecting this fragile ecosystem. Now, because of Julian, people were finally paying attention. But at what cost? Her independence? Her credibility? Her heart? She picked up a framed photo of her father, strong, smiling, standing proudly next to a house he had rebuilt after Katrina. What would you do, Daddy? She whispered. Take the chance or protect what you've built? The answer didn't come easily. But as she set the photo down, Renee made her decision. She would meet Julian halfway, cautiously, carefully, but with an open heart. What she didn't know was that Victoria Whitley was already setting in motion a plan that would test both their newfound connection and everything Renee had worked for. The CNN studio lights were blindingly bright as Renee adjusted her microphone. She had chosen a simple blue blazer over a white blouse. Professional, understated. Beside her, Julian looked equally conservative in a navy suit, though he'd skipped the tie. 3 minutes to air, the producer announced. Nervous? Julian asked quietly. Terrified, Renee admitted. I'm used to academic conferences, not national television. Just talk about your work like you did at the TED Talk. That's what changed everything for me. The red light on the camera blinked on, and the host's voice filled the studio. Today, we're joined by Dr. Renee Caldwell, leading researcher in coastal restoration, and Julian March, heir to the March shipping fortune. Their unexpected connection has been making headlines, but today we're focusing on the environmental mission that brought them together. For the next 10 minutes, Renee explained coastal erosion with the same passion and clarity that had captivated Julian weeks earlier. Julian spoke about his new commitment to environmental responsibility in the shipping industry. "March, shipping has an opportunity to lead by example," he said firmly. "For too long, we've prioritized profit over planetary health. That has to change." The host leaned forward. "And Dr. Caldwell, your research suggests these changes need to happen immediately." "The Louisiana coastline loses a football field of land every 100 minutes, Renee explained. "Each acre of wetlands we lose means less protection for communities during hurricanes. And how would you respond to critics who say your sudden prominence has more to do with your personal relationship with Mr. March than your scientific credentials?" Renee tensed, but maintained her composure. "My research stands on its own merits. I've been doing this work for years, long before meeting Mr. March. The science doesn't change based on who's delivering the message." Julian jumped in. "If my family name brings more attention to Dr. Caldwell's vital research, that's the one good thing to come from my privilege. But make no mistake, the credit belongs to her and scientists like her, who've been sounding the alarm while the rest of us weren't listening." After the interview, they walked through the parking garage toward Julian's car. "You were amazing," Julian said, smiling at her. "Clear, passionate, brilliant." Renee felt herself blushing. "And you didn't sound like a billionaire playboy having a crisis at all." Julian laughed. High praise indeed. As they reached the car, a voice called out from behind a concrete pillar. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Victoria Whitley stepped into view, immaculately dressed in a cream-colored suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled. Julian instinctively moved closer to Renee. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "I came to see the woman you threw away our future for." Victoria's eyes raked over Renee dismissively. "I must say I expected someone more impressive." Renee straightened her shoulders. "Miss Whitley, I understand you're hurt, but—" "Hurt?" Victoria laughed coldly. "Don't flatter yourself. Julian and I were a business arrangement, nothing more. I'm merely protecting my family's interests." Julian's face hardened. "The merger is dead, Victoria. Move on." "Oh, I have moved on. But unfortunately for your new friend, I'm not going away quietly." Victoria pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out to Renee. "Consider this a professional courtesy." Renee hesitantly took the envelope. Inside was a legal document, a lawsuit naming her as defendant in a case of alienation of affection with damages sought of $50 million. "You're suing me?" Renee asked incredulously. "For what?" "I didn't steal Julian from you." Victoria smiled thinly. "The courts will decide that. Meanwhile, every donor, every grant committee, every university board will see your name dragged through a very public, very messy legal battle." Julian stepped forward angrily. "This is ridiculous. You know there was nothing between Renee and me when I called off the wedding." "Do I?" Victoria raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Your obsession with her work began the moment you saw her TED Talk. You tracked her down in Louisiana. It all looks very premeditated." "You won't get away with this," Julian warned. "I already have." Victoria turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Dr. Caldwell, I've also filed formal complaints with the University Ethics Committee suggesting you've been trading academic influence for financial gain. Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame while they last." After she left, Renee leaned against the car, her hands shaking. "She can't actually win this lawsuit, can she?" she asked. Julian ran a hand through his hair. "No, but that's not the point. She doesn't need to win in court. The damage will be done just by filing it." "My reputation," Renee whispered. "Everything I've worked for." Julian reached for her hand. "I won't let her destroy you, Renee, I promise." But as they drove away, both wondered if that was a promise he could keep. Renee's mother, Elaine Caldwell, was waiting on the porch of her modest home when they arrived. At 65, she still stood tall and proud, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "So this is the young man who's turned my daughter's life upside down," she said, eyeing Julian with cautious interest. "Mama, this is Julian March. Julian, my mother, Elaine Caldwell." Julian extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell." Let's see if you still feel that way after I've grilled you over dinner, Elaine replied, but there was a hint of warmth in her eyes. Inside, the small house was immaculate, with photographs covering every wall, many showing a tall, broad-shouldered man with Renee's same determined eyes. Your father, Julian guessed, looking at one photo of the man standing proudly next to a newly built house. Elaine nodded. Robert Caldwell, best carpenter in New Orleans, lost him 5 years ago. Heart attack while rebuilding a church in the lower 9th Ward. I'm sorry, Julian said sincerely. He worked too hard, Elaine said, her voice softening, always putting everyone else first. Renee gets that from him. Over a simple but delicious dinner of red beans and rice, Elaine questioned Julian about his intentions. So you walked away from billions of dollars and a society wedding because of my daughter's TED Talk? Julian met her gaze directly. Because it made me realize I was living someone else's life, not my own. And now you're working as what? A marsh planter? For now, I'm learning from the ground up. Elaine studied him skeptically. Most men in your position would just write a check and call it a day. I've written plenty of checks in my life, Mrs. Caldwell. It's never fixed anything that matters. After dinner, while Renee was helping her mother with the dishes, Julian wandered to the back porch. The small yard backed up to a canal where the water lapped gently against a wooden dock. Elaine joined him, handing him a glass of sweet tea. That canal flooded us with 6 feet of water during Katrina, she said quietly, and again during Ida. Each time the water comes higher, stays longer. Julian nodded. That's what Renee's research addresses, how to rebuild natural barriers. Her father wanted her to be a doctor, make good money, live in a big house on high ground. Elaine smiled faintly, but after Katrina, she couldn't think of anything but fixing what was broken, not just buildings, but the whole system. She's remarkable, Julian said. Yes, she is. Elaine turned to face him directly. Which is why I need to know your intentions aren't going to hurt her. She's already lost too much. Before Julian could respond, Renee joined them on the porch, her face tense. The university just called. The ethics committee wants to meet with me tomorrow morning. She looked at Julian, her eyes filled with worry. Victoria worked fast. The next morning, Renee sat before the university ethics committee, 5 senior professors and administrators, all looking uncomfortable. Dr. Caldwell, began the committee chair, we've received a formal complaint alleging that you've used your position at this university to secure financial benefits from the March family in exchange for environmental endorsements. Renee sat up straighter. That's completely false. I've never received a penny from Julian March or his family. Nevertheless, the allegation has created a perception problem. The New Orleans Times is already asking for comment. Renee felt her anger rising. So it doesn't matter if it's true, only if it looks bad for the university. The committee exchanged glances. We're placing you on administrative leave while we investigate, the chair announced. You'll retain your salary, but must step back from all teaching and research activities on campus. This is my life's work, Renee protested. My research team is in the middle of critical field studies. Dr. Johnson can oversee the team temporarily. Renee felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Maya was her best friend, but the research was Renee's lifeblood. As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. How did it go? She couldn't bring herself to respond. This was exactly what she had feared, her professional reputation tarnished by association with him. Instead of heading home, Renee drove to the coastal research station where her team was gathering data. The simple building sat on stilts near the marshland, equipment and waders piled on the porch. Maya was coordinating a group of graduate students when Renee arrived. Renee, what are you doing here? I thought you had that ethics committee meeting. It's over. They've put me on leave. Renee's voice was flat. Maya's eyes widened. They can't do that. Based on what? Victoria Whitley's complaint. Apparently I'm trading environmental endorsements for March family money. Maya pulled Renee into her office and closed the door. That's ridiculous. Everyone knows your research predates meeting Julian. Evidence doesn't matter in the court of public opinion. Renee sank into a chair. Everything I've worked for, Maya. Everything. Maya sat across from her. So what are you going to do, fight it? How? Victoria has unlimited resources and connections. I'm just the most brilliant environmental scientist I know, Maya interrupted firmly. And now you also have connections. Julian March isn't exactly powerless. Renee shook her head. That's the problem. Using Julian's influence would only prove Victoria's point. I need to fight this on my own terms. As they talked, Renee's phone kept buzzing with messages from Julian. Finally, she answered. I heard what happened, Julian said immediately. I've already called my lawyers. We'll fight this. No, Renee said firmly. No lawyers, no March family influence. That's exactly what Victoria wants, to make it look like I'm using you. Then what can I do? I can't just stand by while she destroys your career. Renee was silent for a moment. Maybe the best thing you can do is step back. Give me space to handle this my way. The silence on the other end of the line was painful. If that's what you want, Julian finally said, his voice tight. I don't know what I want anymore, Renee admitted. But I know I need to face this without being seen as Julian March's new girlfriend. After they hung up, Renee sat staring out at the marshland, watching her research team take measurements and samples. Everything she had built was now at risk, not because of anything she had done wrong, but because a wealthy, powerful woman felt threatened. It wasn't fair. But then life in New Orleans had taught Renee long ago that fairness was a luxury few could afford. Julian paced his apartment, frustration building with each step. How could Renee push him away now, when she needed help the most? Didn't she understand that Victoria would stop at nothing? His phone rang, his father. I heard about the lawsuit, Richard said without preamble. Victoria is out for blood. I know, she's targeting Renee to get to me. Come back to New York, Julian. End this Louisiana adventure. Victoria has agreed to drop everything if you return to your position. Julian stopped pacing. She told you that? We had lunch yesterday. She's hurt, but practical. The merger still makes financial sense for both families. And what about Renee? Her career is being destroyed because of me. Richard's voice hardened. Dr. Caldwell is not your responsibility. She was doing fine before you came along and she'll manage after you leave. I'm not leaving, Dad. Then you're a fool. Victoria won't stop with a simple lawsuit. She has friends on every major funding board in the country. One word from her, and Dr. Caldwell's research grants will dry up overnight. The threat was clear. Julian felt trapped. Stay and watch Victoria systematically destroy Renee's career, or leave and possibly save it. I need time to think, he finally said. Don't take too long. Victoria's patience has limits. After hanging up, Julian stared at the photographs of coastal erosion that now covered his walls. Renee's passion had become his own. But what good was his commitment if it only brought her pain? His phone buzzed with a news alert. March Shipping announces record quarterly profits despite heir's absence. The accompanying photo showed his father and Victoria's father shaking hands at a press conference. The message couldn't have been clearer. Life was moving on without him, and Victoria was already positioning herself as part of the March business empire. Julian made a decision. If Renee wouldn't let him fight alongside her, he would fight a different battle, one where his family name and wealth could actually make a difference. Renee spent the next week in virtual isolation, refusing all media requests and focusing on writing a detailed defense for the ethics committee. The lawsuit filed by Victoria was already making headlines, with tabloids running side-by-side photos of the two women with tasteless captions asking, "Worth losing $1 billion for?" On Friday evening, Maya showed up at her door with wine and takeout. "Enough hiding," she announced. "You need human contact and alcohol in that order." As they ate, Maya updated Renee on the research team's progress. Then she pulled out her tablet. "Have you seen this? Julian March made a major announcement today." Renee tensed. "I've been avoiding the news." Maya played a video clip. Julian stood at a podium looking confident and determined. "Today I'm announcing the creation of the Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million, my personal funds, not March Shipping's. This independent non-profit organization will fund scientific research and practical restoration projects along the entire Gulf Coast." The reporter asked, "Is Dr. Renee Caldwell involved in this foundation?" Julian's face remained neutral. Dr. Caldwell's research was certainly influential in my understanding of coastal issues. However, she is not affiliated with this foundation in any way. We have recruited a diverse board of scientific experts who will review grant applications based solely on merit. Renee stared at the screen. Julian had created a foundation that would support her type of research, but had deliberately kept her name out of it, giving her exactly the distance she had asked for. That's actually pretty impressive, Maya admitted. He's using his money and influence to support the cause without dragging you into it. Renee felt a confusing mix of emotions: gratitude, admiration, and an unexpected sense of loss. He's doing exactly what I asked, she said quietly, giving me space. Maya studied her friend's face. And that's what you want, right? Space? Renee didn't answer. The Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation quickly became major news in environmental circles. Julian had recruited respected scientists from across the country to serve on the board, ensuring its credibility. A week after the announcement, Renee received an unexpected visitor at her home, Richard March. "Dr. Caldwell," he said when she opened the door, his tone businesslike. "May I come in?" Renee hesitated, then stepped aside. Julian's father looked out of place in her modest living room, his tailored suit and expensive watch, marking him as someone from a different world. "I'll be direct," Richard said, declining her offer of coffee. "This situation has gone on long enough. My son has created a $50 million foundation because of you. Victoria Whitley is destroying your reputation because of you. And March Shipping is caught in the middle of a public relations nightmare." Renee crossed her arms. "With all due respect, Mr. March, none of that is my doing. I didn't ask Julian to cancel his wedding or create a foundation. No, but you captured his imagination with your environmental crusade, and now I'm offering you a way out, for both of you." "I'm listening." Richard leaned forward. "March Shipping will fund your research directly, $5 million a year for 5 years. We'll create an environmental division within the company and name you as its director, a prestigious position with resources beyond anything a university could offer." Renee was stunned. "And in exchange? You convinced Julian to return to New York and his executive role. The two of you end whatever personal relationship is developing. You focus on your research, he focuses on the company, and everyone wins." "Everyone except Victoria Whitley," Renee pointed out. Richard waved dismissively. "Victoria is a practical woman. The merger can proceed without a wedding." Renee stood up. "Let me be clear, Mr. March. I won't be bought, and I won't manipulate Julian. If he wants to return to New York, that's his choice." "Even if staying here means watching your career and reputation destroyed? Victoria's lawsuit is just the beginning, Dr. Caldwell. She has connections in every academic institution in the country. Are you threatening me, Mr. March? I'm offering you a lifeline. Take it or don't. The choice is yours." He placed a business card on her coffee table. "Call me when you've thought it through." After he left, Renee sat in stunned silence. The offer was tempting: financial security, prestigious position, freedom to continue her research. All she had to do was send Julian away. But something inside her rebelled at the thought, not just because of her growing feelings for Julian, but because of the manipulation, the cold calculation behind the offer. Her phone rang. Julian. "I just saw my father's car leaving your neighborhood," he said without greeting. "What did he want?" "To offer me a deal," Renee replied honestly. "Research funding in exchange for sending you back to New York." Julian cursed under his breath. "I'm sorry, Renee. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. They're using you to get to me." "Or using you to get to me," she pointed out. "Either way, they're treating us like pawns." "What did you tell him?" "To leave. I don't make deals with manipulators." There was a pause. "I've missed you," Julian said finally. "This past week, giving you space. It's been harder than I expected." Renee felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I've missed you too. The foundation board is meeting tomorrow. After that, would you have dinner with me? Just dinner, no pressure." "I'd like that," Renee admitted. Victoria Whitley sat in her attorney's plush office, examining her manicure with a bored expression. "So the ethics committee hasn't fired her yet?" The lawyer shook his head. They're proceeding cautiously. Dr. Caldwell has an excellent reputation in academic circles. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Then we need something more concrete. Rumors and innuendo aren't enough. The lawsuit is proceeding as planned. Discovery begins next week. Too slow, Victoria snapped. I need something now. Julian's little foundation is gaining positive press every day. The lawyer hesitated. There is one other approach. We've been investigating Dr. Caldwell's research data. There are some inconsistencies in her published papers. Victoria leaned forward, suddenly interested. What kind of inconsistencies? Minor statistical anomalies. Nothing that definitively proves misconduct, but enough to raise questions if presented in the right context. A slow, calculating smile spread across Victoria's face. Scientific fraud. Now that would destroy her completely. As I said, we don't have proof of fraud. You don't need proof. You just need enough to start a formal investigation. Once the accusation is made, the damage is done. Victoria stood up, smoothing her designer dress. File the complaint with the university and leak it to the press. Today. The next evening, Julian waited at the restaurant, checking his watch anxiously. Renee was 15 minutes late, which wasn't like her. He tried calling, but there was no answer. Finally, his phone rang. Maya. Julian, it's Maya Johnson, Renee's colleague. Have you seen the news? No, what's happened? Victoria Whitley's lawyers have filed a formal complaint accusing Renee of scientific misconduct, falsifying research data. It's all over the academic websites, and the Times-Picayune just picked it up. Julian felt his blood run cold. That's insane. Renee would never falsify data. Of course she wouldn't. But the university has to investigate now that a formal complaint has been filed. She's devastated, Julian. She went out to the research station. I think she needs you. Julian was already moving toward the door. I'm on my way. The drive to the coastal research station took over an hour. When Julian arrived, the small building was dark except for a single light in the main lab. He found Renee sitting alone, surrounded by stacks of research notes and data printouts. Hey, he said softly. She looked up, her eyes red from crying. They're saying I made up my research data. Everything I've worked for my entire career. They're saying it's all a fraud. Julian knelt beside her chair. No one who knows you would believe that for a second. It doesn't matter what people believe. The university has to investigate. My grants will be frozen. Even if I'm cleared, the suspicion will always be there. Her voice broke. This is what my father feared when I chose science over medicine. He said the academic world would eat me alive. Julian took her hands in his. We'll fight this, Renee, together. I won't let Victoria destroy you. Renee looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. Why? Why risk everything? Your family, your company, your future. For me? For this? Julian's answer was simple. Because when you spoke about saving the coastline, about one person making a difference, I finally understood what it means to live with purpose. You didn't just change my mind, Renee. You woke up my soul. Renee stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened marshland. They'll come for your foundation next. Victoria won't stop until she's destroyed everything. Let her try, Julian said firmly. My foundation board includes 3 Nobel laureates and the former head of the EPA. They can't be intimidated. Renee turned back to him, a new resolve hardening in her eyes. I won't run and hide. I won't let them make me ashamed of work I know is honest and important. That's the Renee Caldwell who changed my life in San Francisco, Julian said with a smile, fierce and unstoppable. For the first time that day, Renee smiled too. We need a plan, a real one, not just determination. Julian nodded. I think I know where to start. The next morning, Maya arrived at the research station to find Renee and Julian surrounded by laptops and papers. You two look like you've been up all night, she observed. We have, Renee confirmed. We're going through every piece of data from every paper I've published, identifying the supposed anomalies Victoria's lawyers are using to accuse me of fraud. Julian looked up from his laptop. And we've found the pattern. They're cherry-picking isolated data points and taking them out of context. Maya peered over their shoulders. So what's the plan? Full transparency, Renee said firmly. We're publishing all my raw data online. Every measurement, every field note, everything. Let other scientists see for themselves. And I'm calling a press conference, Julian added. Not just to defend Renee, but to expose what Victoria and my father are really doing, using their power and money to silence scientific research that threatens their business interests. Maya looked worried. That's declaring war on two of the most powerful families in the country. They declared war first, Julian replied, when they attacked Renee's work. As they continued working, Julian's phone rang. His brother, Michael. Julian, you need to come to the hospital. Dad's had a heart attack. St. Luke's Hospital was quiet as Julian rushed through the corridors. He found Michael in the waiting room, looking pale and exhausted. How is he? Julian asked. Stable for now. The doctor says it was stress-induced. Michael fixed his younger brother with an accusing stare. He's been working 18-hour days trying to fix the mess you created. Julian sighed. Can I see him? He's sleeping, and honestly, I'm not sure he wants to see you right now. Julian sat down beside his brother. I never meant to hurt him, Michael. I just couldn't keep living a lie. Michael was quiet for a moment. You know, I always envied you. Dad's golden boy, the chosen successor. I was the backup plan. You shouldn't have envied me. I was miserable trying to be who he wanted instead of figuring out who I actually am. And now? Have you figured it out? Julian nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to. And it begins with standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Michael studied his brother's face. This woman, Dr. Caldwell, she must be pretty special. She is. But this isn't just about her. It's about the work she does, the coastline she's trying to save. Our coastline, Michael. A nurse approached them. Mr. March is awake. He's asking for both of you. Richard March looked smaller in the hospital bed, his usual commanding presence diminished by illness. His eyes found Julian immediately. So, you came back after all, he said, his voice weaker than Julian had ever heard it. Of course I did. You're my father. Richard's gaze shifted to Michael. Could you give us a moment alone? After Michael left, Richard gestured for Julian to sit closer. Victoria called me yesterday, he said, told me about the scientific misconduct complaint. Julian tensed. It's a lie, Dad. She's trying to destroy Renee's reputation because of me. I know. Richard's admission was unexpected. Victoria has always been ruthless. It's why her father and I thought she'd be perfect for you and for the company. You knew she would do something like this? Richard sighed. I didn't know specifically, but I suspected she wouldn't let you go easily. He shifted in the bed, grimacing in pain. This heart attack has given me time to think about the company, about you. Julian waited, uncertain where this was heading. I don't agree with your methods, Richard continued. Running off to Louisiana, canceling the wedding, embarrassing the family. But I can't deny that you found something that matters to you. It does matter, Dad. The coastline is disappearing. Communities are at risk, and our company is part of the problem. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Your foundation, is it making a difference? It's just starting, but yes, we're funding research and actual restoration projects. Then perhaps March Shipping should contribute, not because I agree with your environmental crusade, but because my son finally cares about something beyond himself. Julian was stunned. Are you serious? A heart attack has a way of clarifying priorities. Richard reached for Julian's hand. I don't understand the man you're becoming, but I'd rather try than lose you completely. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. And for Julian, who had spent his entire life seeking his father's approval, it felt like a victory. As he left the hospital, Julian called Renee with the news. He's offering corporate support for the foundation, Julian explained. No strings attached. That's unexpected, Renee replied cautiously. What about Victoria's lawsuit and the misconduct allegations? One step at a time. But if my father withdraws his support from Victoria, she loses a significant ally. I hope you're right. Renee's voice was tired. The University Investigative Committee meets tomorrow. I'll be presenting all my data and methodology. Do you want me there? She hesitated. No, This is something I need to face on my own, but maybe you could be waiting afterward. Julian smiled into the phone. Absolutely. And Renee, whatever happens, we'll face it together. Victoria Whitley was furious when she received the call from Richard March. What do you mean you're withdrawing support for the merger? We had an agreement. Circumstances have changed, Richard replied calmly. March Shipping is exploring new directions, including environmental initiatives that align with Julian's foundation. This is because of her, isn't it? That Caldwell woman has gotten to you too. No, Victoria. This is because of my son. I've realized there are more important things than mergers and acquisitions. After hanging up, Victoria hurled her phone across the room. Everything was falling apart. The merger, her position in society, her revenge against the woman who had stolen Julian. She made another call to her attorney. I don't care what it takes, she hissed. I want those misconduct allegations to stick. Find something, anything, that will destroy her credibility permanently. The attorney's voice was hesitant. Ms. Whitley, I should warn you, if we fabricate evidence of scientific misconduct, that crosses into criminal territory. Did I say fabricate? I said find something. Everyone has secrets. Everyone makes mistakes. Find hers. But even as she hung up, Victoria knew she was losing control. Without Richard March's backing, her position was weaker. The Whitley fortune was substantial, but the March empire was on another level entirely. She needed a new approach, one that would hurt both Julian and Renee where they were most vulnerable. The university investigation into Renee's research was thorough but fair. For 6 hours, she presented her methodology, her raw data, and her statistical analyses to the committee of senior scientists. By the end, even the most skeptical committee member seemed convinced of her integrity. Dr. Caldwell, the committee chair said finally, we see no evidence of misconduct in your research. The allegations appear to be without merit. Relief flooded through Renee. Thank you. However, the chair continued, this public controversy has created a difficult situation for the university. We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you took a voluntary leave of absence until the civil lawsuit is resolved. And just like that, the victory turned hollow. She was being pushed out anyway, not because of any wrongdoing, but because the university didn't want the controversy. I understand, Renee said stiffly, gathering her papers. Outside the administration building, Julian was waiting as promised. One look at her face told him everything. They cleared you of misconduct but asked you to leave anyway, he guessed. Renee nodded, fighting back tears. Apparently my innocence is less important than the university's reputation. Julian pulled her into a hug, not caring who might see them. I'm so sorry, Renee. This is all because of me, because of my family. No, she said firmly, pulling back to look at him. This is because powerful people don't like being challenged. They don't like when someone like me, a black woman from the 9th Ward, tells them their business practices are destroying communities. Julian took her hand. What do you want to do now? Renee looked toward the university buildings where she had built her career. Then she turned toward the direction of the coast, where her real work mattered. I want to keep fighting, not just for my reputation, but for the coastline, for the communities at risk, and I'm tired of doing it with one hand tied behind my back. What do you mean? Her eyes met his, determination replacing despair. I mean, I'm done playing by their rules. If the university won't support my research, then I'll find another way. Maybe it's time I considered joining your foundation, not as Julian March's girlfriend, but as a scientist with expertise they need. Julian's face lit up. The board would approve your appointment in a heartbeat. Your credentials are impeccable. And the optics? The conflict of interest? We'll be transparent about everything. Full disclosure, clear boundaries between personal and professional. For the first time all day, Renee smiled. It won't be easy. Victoria will use it as ammunition in her lawsuit. Let her, Julian said firmly. We know the truth. And now so does the university committee. As they walked toward Julian's car, Renee felt a strange sense of liberation. The university had been her safe harbor, her validation. But perhaps it had also been limiting her, keeping her research confined to academic circles when it needed to reach the real world. 3 months later, The headquarters of the Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation buzzed with activity. In a surprisingly short time, what had begun as Julian's impulsive vision had grown into a respected environmental organization with 30 full-time staff and dozens of active projects along the coast. Renee walked through the open-plan office, nodding to researchers and administrators as she made her way to her corner office. As Chief Scientific Officer, she had assembled a team of dedicated scientists, many of whom had followed her from the university. Maya poked her head in as Renee settled at her desk. "The New York Times reporter is here for your interview, and don't forget, the governor's office called again about the presentation next week." Renee nodded, taking a deep breath. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of professional challenges and personal growth. Leaving the university had been painful, but the foundation gave her research a direct path to implementation that academic work never could. The reporter, a serious young woman with a digital recorder, settled into the chair across from Renee. "Dr. Caldwell, thank you for making time. The foundation's rapid growth has surprised many observers. Critics suggest it's more about rehabilitating the March family image than actual environmental work. How do you respond?" Renee smiled slightly, used to this line of questioning by now. "Results speak louder than speculation. In 3 months, we've restored 40 acres of marshland, installed erosion monitoring stations in 5 coastal parishes, and provided emergency planning assistance to communities most vulnerable to hurricane damage. Judge us by our work, not by gossip." The interview continued for an hour, covering the foundation's scientific approach and future plans. Only at the end did the reporter venture into personal territory. "The lawsuit filed by Victoria Whitley remains active, alleging you interfered in her relationship with Julian March. Has that affected your work here?" "The lawsuit is without merit, as the court will eventually determine," Renee replied carefully. "Mr. March and I maintain a professional relationship at the foundation, and I won't comment further on personal matters." It was the answer she always gave, a carefully constructed wall between her public and private lives. What the reporter didn't know, what few people knew, was how much that wall had cost her. After the interview, Renee checked her watch. Julian would be back from Washington, D.C. soon, where he'd been testifying before a congressional committee on shipping industry regulations. They hadn't spoken in 3 days, the longest they'd gone without contact since the foundation launched. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Landed, meeting with board members at 4, dinner tonight?" She replied with a simple, "Yes," allowing herself a small smile. Despite everything, the lawsuit, the public scrutiny, the professional challenges, her feelings for Julian had only deepened. But she had insisted on keeping their relationship private and professional in public, a boundary Julian respected, even though she knew it frustrated him. Victoria Whitley sat in her father's office in the Whitley building, manicured nails drumming impatiently on the leather armchair. "The lawsuit is stalled," her attorney explained. "Dr. Caldwell's lawyers have filed for dismissal, citing lack of evidence." "So find more evidence," Victoria snapped. "It's been 3 months. Surely they've slipped up somewhere." Her father, William Whitley, sighed heavily. "Victoria, perhaps it's time to reconsider this vendetta. The March-Whitley merger is dead. Richard March has made it clear he won't reverse course." "This isn't about the merger anymore, Daddy. It's about principle." William exchanged glances with the attorney. "It's about pride, and it's becoming expensive and embarrassing. The March Foundation is gaining positive press daily, while you're increasingly portrayed as a jilted, vengeful ex." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "So I should just let them win? Let her take everything I was supposed to have?" "Move on," her father said bluntly. "There are other eligible men, other business opportunities. This fixation is becoming unhealthy." After they left, Victoria stood at the window of her father's office, looking out at the New Orleans skyline. In the distance, she could see the modern glass building that housed the Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation, a constant reminder of her humiliation. Her phone buzzed with an alert, another news story about Julian March testifying before Congress, positioned as a reformed corporate heir fighting for environmental regulations. The accompanying photo showed him looking confident and purposeful, nothing like the controllable man she had almost married. Something inside Victoria hardened. If her father and her lawyers wouldn't help, she would find another way to strike back. At the foundation offices, Julian stepped off the elevator, immediately greeted by Ben, his assistant. The board members are waiting in the conference room, and Dr. Caldwell asked to join the meeting. Julian nodded, suppressing the smile that threatened whenever Renee was mentioned. Their agreement to maintain professional distance at work was necessary but challenging. Every day, he wanted nothing more than to tell the world how he felt about her. In the conference room, the Foundation's board members, distinguished scientists and business leaders were engaged in animated conversation. Renee sat among them, her professional demeanor giving no hint of their personal connection. "Julian," greeted Dr. Harold Winters, the board chair. "Your testimony in Washington made quite an impression. 3 senators have already reached out to discuss coastal protection legislation." "The scientific data was compelling," Julian replied, nodding respectfully toward Renee. "Dr. Caldwell's research provided the backbone of my testimony." The meeting covered the Foundation's expanding projects and budget allocations. Throughout, Julian found his gaze continually drawn to Renee. She was in her element, confidently explaining complex environmental models to the board, her passion evident in every gesture. This was the woman who had changed his life, not by trying to change him, but by showing him a purpose greater than himself. After the meeting, board members filed out, leaving Julian and Renee alone in the conference room. "You were amazing in Washington," she said once the door closed. "I watched the testimony online." "I was terrified," Julian admitted. "But I kept thinking about what you told me before I left, that the coastline doesn't care about politics, only action." Renee smiled, moving closer. 3 months ago, you were a runaway groom in Italian loafers. Now you're testifying before Congress about environmental regulations. Life takes unexpected turns, his voice softened, especially when you meet someone who makes you want to be better. For a moment, the professional facade dropped away, and Renee's eyes revealed what she worked so hard to hide in public, the depth of her feelings for him. "Dinner tonight?" Julian asked. "My place? I've missed you." Renee nodded. "I've missed you too." Julian's apartment in the Garden District was a far cry from his New York penthouse, smaller, warmer, filled with books on environmental science and coastal geography that he'd been studying relentlessly. He prepared dinner himself, a skill he'd been practicing with mixed results. Tonight's attempt at jambalaya was his best yet, though still not up to New Orleans standards. When Renee arrived, she brought a bottle of wine and the easy smile she reserved for their private moments together. "Something smells good," she said, kissing him lightly. "Don't get too excited, I'm still a beginner." Julian took her coat. "But I'm learning." Over dinner, they caught up on the past 3 days, talking about Julian's meetings in Washington and Renee's progress with the research team. It felt comfortable, natural, a stark contrast to the formal relationship they maintained in public. "The New York Times reporter asked about us today," Renee mentioned as they moved to the couch with glasses of wine. Julian tensed slightly. "What did you say?" "The usual, that we maintain a professional relationship and I won't comment on personal matters." Julian was quiet for a moment. "How much longer, Renee? How much longer do we have to pretend there's nothing between us?" It was a conversation they'd had before. Julian pushing for openness, Renee insisting on privacy. "The lawsuit is still active, Julian. If we go public with our relationship, Victoria will use it against me. She's already doing her worst, and we're winning. The foundation is thriving, your research is being implemented, people are listening." Renee set down her wine glass. "Hey, it's not just about the lawsuit. It's about my credibility as a scientist. I fought my entire career to be taken seriously, to have my work judged on its merits. If I'm seen as Julian March's girlfriend, that all gets overshadowed." Julian moved closer, taking her hand. "I understand that. I do. But at some point, we have to live our truth. I'm in love with you, Renee. I have been since you walked onto that stage in San Francisco, and hiding it is getting harder every day." Renee's breath caught at his words. They hadn't said love before, though both had felt it growing between them. "Julian, Her phone rang, Maya's ringtone. Renee almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. "Renee, turn on the news. Channel 4, now." Julian found the remote and switched on the television. A breaking news banner filled the screen. Whistleblower alleges financial impropriety at Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation. The reporter stood outside their office building. Sources close to the foundation claim that funds designated for coastal restoration projects have been diverted to personal accounts connected to both Julian March and Dr. Renee Caldwell. The whistleblower, who wishes to remain anonymous, has provided documents allegedly showing irregular financial transfers. Renee and Julian stared at the screen in shock. "This is Victoria," Julian said, his voice tight with anger. "She couldn't destroy your scientific reputation, so now she's attacking the foundation." Renee was already calling the foundation's financial director. "Martin, are you seeing this? Yes, I know it's nonsense, but we need to respond immediately. Call an emergency board meeting for first thing tomorrow." As Renee made calls, Julian paced the room, his mind racing. Just when everything was going well, just when their work was making a real difference, Victoria had found a new angle of attack. "The financial records are completely transparent," Renee said after hanging up. "There's nothing to find, because we've done nothing wrong." "That doesn't matter in the court of public opinion," Julian replied grimly. "The accusation alone will damage the foundation's reputation. Donors will get nervous. Partners will distance themselves." Renee sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "When does it end, Julian? When does she stop punishing us for a wedding that never happened?" Julian sat beside her, pulling her close. "When she has nothing left to target, as long as the foundation exists, as long as we're doing good work, she'll keep attacking." They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling over them. Then Julian straightened, a determined look in his eyes. "Unless we take away her motivation." "What do you mean?" Julian took both her hands in his. "Victoria's attacks are fueled by jealousy and revenge. She believes you took something that was hers, me, my family's influence, a position in society." "I didn't take anything," Renee protested. "I know that. But what if we stopped giving her something to be jealous of? What if I stepped down from the foundation?" Renee pulled back, shocked. "What? No. The foundation is your vision, your creation. It's our vision now, and the science, the real work, that's all you and the research team. I provide funding and connections, but you provide the substance." "Julian, you can't be serious after everything you've built." His eyes were steady, resolved. "I've been thinking about this for a while. The foundation is established now. It doesn't need me as the public face anymore. In fact, having a march leading an environmental organization will always create skepticism about our motives." "Where would you go? Back to New York? Back to March shipping?" Julian shook his head. "No, but I could take a less public role, work behind the scenes. Let the scientists be the focus, not the billionaire who started it all." Renee studied his face, seeing the sincerity there. "You would do that? Step away from something you believe in so deeply?" "I believe in you more," Julian said simply. "And in the work we're doing, if my stepping back protects that work, it's worth it." Renee felt tears building in her eyes. This man, who had once embodied every privilege she'd resented, was willing to give up his position to protect their mission. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "We shouldn't make decisions in crisis mode." Julian nodded, though the resolve in his eyes didn't waver. Whatever came next, he had already made his choice. The emergency board meeting the next morning was tense but productive. The foundation's financial records were completely transparent, easily disproving the whistleblower's claims. "We'll issue a comprehensive statement," Dr. Winters decided, "and open our books to an independent audit. Transparency is our best defense." As the meeting concluded, Julian asked to speak. "I've been considering a structural change for some time. In light of recent events, I believe now is the appropriate moment to implement it." The board members looked at him with surprise. Renee tensed, guessing what was coming. "I'm proposing to step down as executive director and nominate Dr. Winters as my replacement. I would remain on the board and continue my financial support, but in a less public role." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. Dr. Winters looked stunned. Julian, that's not necessary. This attack will blow over. It's not just about this attack, Julian replied calmly. It's about the Foundation's long-term credibility. We're a scientific organization, not a vanity project for a March heir. The science should be our focus, not my personal journey. As board members debated the proposal, Renee watched Julian with a mixture of admiration and concern. He was sacrificing his public role to protect their work and, though he hadn't said it explicitly, to remove Victoria's primary target. After the meeting, they walked to her office, closing the door for privacy. "You didn't have to do that," Renee said quietly. "Yes, I did. The Foundation is bigger than me now. It needs to stand on its scientific merits, not my family name." Renee moved closer, her professional reserve dropping away. "What will you do?" "Focus on what matters most. The work. Us." He took her hand. "Renee, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about when Victoria will stop. The answer is, when she has nothing left to attack." "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we stop hiding? What if we face her head-on together? No more pretending we're just colleagues, no more separate lives, the truth out in the open." Renee felt a flutter of panic. "Julian, the lawsuit, let her lawsuit proceed. Let her attack the Foundation. We keep fighting, but we stop hiding who we are to each other." His eyes held hers. "I love you, Renee. I want to build a life with you, not just a foundation or a career, but a future." The words hung between them, a declaration and a question all at once. "I love you too," Renee admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "But I'm scared. Everything I've worked for stands on its own merits," Julian finished. "Your research, your leadership, they speak for themselves. Victoria can't take that away, no matter how hard she tries." Renee thought about all they'd been through. The media attacks, the lawsuit, the professional setbacks. Through it all, Julian had stood beside her, learning and growing, never trying to overshadow her work, but amplifying it instead. "Okay," she said finally, "no more hiding." The annual Gulf Coast Environmental Gala was the premier event for the region's environmental organizations, drawing scientists, donors, and political figures from across the country. As the newest and most high-profile organization, the Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation had been invited to present its first-year achievements. The grand ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel glittered with chandeliers and elegant decorations. At the entrance, Renee paused, smoothing the simple but elegant navy blue gown she had chosen for the evening. "Ready?" Julian asked, looking handsome in his tuxedo. Renee took a deep breath. "Ready." They entered together, hand in hand, a clear statement to everyone present. Conversations paused momentarily as people noticed their linked hands, but soon resumed with increased interest. Dr. Winters approached them with a smile. "The new power couple makes their debut. About time." Julian grinned. "We thought subtlety was overrated." Across the room, Renee spotted Victoria Whitley in an expensive white gown, watching them with barely concealed fury. Richard March stood nearby, looking surprisingly unbothered by his son's public declaration. "Your father is here," Renee noted. Julian nodded. "He called this morning, said he wouldn't miss your big night." Over the past 3 months, Julian's relationship with his father had slowly improved. Richard had kept his word about supporting the foundation, though he remained skeptical about Julian's career choices. As they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions, Renee was surprised by how liberating it felt to finally acknowledge their relationship openly. Midway through the evening, Dr. Winters took the stage to introduce the Foundation's presentation. "Tonight we are honored to have our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Renee Caldwell, share the remarkable progress of the Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation's first year." Applause filled the room as Renee made her way to the podium. She spotted Julian in the front row, his eyes filled with pride and something deeper, a belief in her that had never wavered, even when she doubted herself. "Thank you, Dr. Winters. 1 year ago, I stood on a stage in San Francisco, speaking about coastal erosion and the need for immediate action. I had no idea that talk would change not just my professional path, but my personal journey as well." She glanced at Julian, allowing herself a small smile before continuing. The Gulf Coast Restoration Foundation was born from a vision that environmental protection and economic prosperity are not opposing forces, but complementary goals. In our first year, we've restored 65 acres of vital wetlands, developed new erosion monitoring technology, and partnered with communities to create sustainable protection plans. As Renee continued her presentation, displaying maps and data showing the foundation's impact, she felt a surge of pride. Despite all the obstacles, all the attacks, they had created something meaningful, something that would outlast any personal vendetta or lawsuit. After the presentation, thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Julian was the first on his feet, his face beaming with admiration. As Renee made her way back to their table, Victoria Whitley intercepted her, champagne glass in hand. "Impressive speech, Dr. Caldwell," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Though I notice you glossed over the recent allegations of financial impropriety. Those allegations were disproven within 24 hours, Renee replied calmly. "Our financial records are completely transparent." Victoria sipped her champagne. "For now, but there will be other allegations, other controversies. As long as you're with him, the attacks will never stop." Renee met Victoria's gaze steadily. "Is that a threat, Ms. Whitley? A prediction?" "Julian was meant for a different world. My world. You may have him now, but you'll never truly belong where he comes from." Before Renee could respond, Julian appeared at her side, his hand finding hers. "Victoria," he acknowledged coolly, "I trust you enjoyed the presentation." Victoria's perfect mask slipped slightly. "It was educational. Though I'm surprised to see you in a supporting role, Julian. You used to prefer the spotlight." "I've learned there are more important things than being the center of attention," Julian replied, "like supporting work that actually matters." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Your father still hopes you'll come to your senses eventually. This environmental phase won't last forever." "It's not a phase, Victoria, it's a purpose." Julian's voice was firm but not unkind. "I hope you find yours someday." Taking Renee's arm, Julian led her away, leaving Victoria staring after them. "That was surprisingly civil," Renee remarked. "What's the point of hostility? She's fighting a battle that's already over." Julian squeezed her hand. "Though I suspect the lawsuit will continue for a while." "Let it," Renee said with newfound confidence. "We have nothing to hide anymore." As the evening progressed, Renee was surprised when Richard March approached their table. "Dr. Caldwell, that was an impressive presentation. Clear, factual, compelling." "Thank you, Mr. March," Renee replied, caught off guard by the genuine compliment. Richard turned to his son. "Julian, I've been reviewing the Foundation's first-year results. The coastal restoration methods you're implementing could be adapted for our shipping facilities along the Gulf." Julian looked surprised. "You're considering implementing our recommendations?" "The board is discussing it." Richard straightened his tie. "Purely for business reasons, of course. Sustainable practices reduce liability and improve community relations." Julian smiled, recognizing the olive branch his father was extending. "Of course. Purely business." Richard hesitated, then added, "Your mother would be proud of you, Julian. She always believed in protecting the natural world, even when I thought it was impractical." It was the first time Richard had mentioned Julian's mother in years. The unexpected reference to the woman who had died when Julian was just 10 years old caught him off guard. "I didn't know that about her," Julian said quietly. "There's a lot you don't know, perhaps. Perhaps it's time I shared more of her with you." Richard glanced at Renee. "She would have liked you, Dr. Caldwell. She valued people who stood by their principles." After Richard moved on, Julian sat in thoughtful silence. "Are you okay?" Renee asked gently. "Better than okay," Julian replied. "That's the most my father has said about my mother in 20 years. It's like he's finally seeing me as my own person, not just his successor." As the gala continued around them, Renee felt a sense of peace settling over her. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Victoria's lawsuit would proceed, critics would continue to question their motives, and the work of coastal restoration faced endless challenges. But for the first time since Julian had appeared at her lecture months ago, Renee felt certain they were exactly where they were meant to be. Later that night, Julian and Renee stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the lights of New Orleans. The evening had been a triumph, not just for the foundation, but for them as a couple. "My mother would be celebrating tonight," Renee said, thinking of Elaine's proud face when she'd called after the gala. "She said my father would have been telling everyone his daughter saved the coastline." Julian smiled, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "He would be right. You are saving it, 1 acre at a time." Renee leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We're saving it. Together." Julian turned her gently to face him. "I've been thinking about what Victoria said tonight, that I was meant for a different world. She's right, but not in the way she thinks." "What do you mean?" "I was meant for this world, yours, a world of purpose and integrity, where actions matter more than appearances." Julian took her hands in his. "I was meant to be standing right here with you." Renee smiled, the last of her reservations falling away. "And I was meant to be standing with you, even if it took a cancelled wedding and a whole lot of drama to get here." Julian laughed softly. "Worth every headline, every lawsuit, every moment of uncertainty." As they stood together under the New Orleans night sky, Renee thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a TED Talk in San Francisco to a gala in New Orleans, from strangers to partners in every sense of the word. The path ahead would have challenges: Victoria's lawsuit, professional obstacles, the never-ending battle to save the coastline, but they would face them together, their shared purpose stronger than any force trying to pull them apart. "Julian," Renee said suddenly, remembering something that had been bothering her, "why did you really cancel your wedding? Was it really just because of my TED Talk?" Julian was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Your talk was the catalyst," he admitted. "But the truth is, I was drowning in a life that wasn't mine. You showed me what it looks like when someone lives with authentic purpose. The moment I saw that, I couldn't go back to pretending." He touched her face gently. "You didn't just change what I think about the environment, Renee. You changed how I think about what makes a life worth living." Renee leaned into his touch, all the walls she had built around her heart now completely gone. "If we wait for the world to care, it will be too late," she quoted her own words from the TED Talk. "But if one person acts, just one brave heart, it can ripple across oceans." Julian smiled, recognizing the words that had changed everything for him. "You were that one brave heart for me, and you were mine," Renee replied. "I was so focused on saving the coastline, I forgot to let anyone in. Until you showed up, persistent and humble and determined to learn." Inside the apartment, Renee's phone buzzed. Maya, sending a link to the first news coverage of the gala. The headline read, "Environmental Power Couple Makes Official Debut at Gulf Coast Gala." Renee showed it to Julian with a laugh. "So much for keeping a low profile." "No more hiding," Julian said, pulling her close. "Not from Victoria, not from the press, not from anyone." As they kissed under the stars, Renee knew they had both found something neither had been looking for. Not just purpose or passion, or even love, but a partner who made them stronger, braver, more fully themselves. The woman who had once lost everything to rising waters had found solid ground at last. And the man who had walked away from $1 billion wedding had found something infinitely more valuable. On a balcony in New Orleans, as the Mississippi River flowed steadily toward the Gulf, two people who had changed each other's lives held on tight, ready to face whatever came next, together. The following morning, the Times-Picayune ran a small piece on page 6, "Whitley lawsuit against Caldwell dropped." The brief article stated that Victoria Whitley had unexpectedly withdrawn her lawsuit against Dr. Renee Caldwell, with no further comment from her attorneys. No one noticed Victoria boarding a private jet to Europe that same morning, her father's words finally sinking in. "Move on. There are other opportunities." As the plane took off, carrying her away from New Orleans and the humiliation of the past months, Victoria looked out the window at the coastline below, the same coastline Renee fought to protect. For a brief moment, she wondered what it might be like to care about something that deeply, to fight for something beyond status and wealth and family expectations. Then she turned away from the window, ordered champagne from the flight attendant, and began planning her triumphant return to New York society. Some lessons would take longer to learn than others. 3 days after the gala, Julian and Renee stood knee-deep in marsh mud, planting grass alongside foundation volunteers. No cameras, no press, no fancy clothes, just the hard, necessary work of rebuilding what had been lost. "This is it," Renee said, looking out over the newly planted section. "This is what matters." Julian wiped sweat from his brow, mud streaking his face. Worth every blister. As the sun began to set over the marshland, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Julian reached for Renee's muddy hand. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for that TED Talk in San Francisco. Grateful I didn't say I do to a life that wasn't mine." Renee squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "And I'm grateful you were brave enough to listen to your heart." Around them, the marshland stretched toward the horizon, fragile but resilient, much like the bond they had forged through months of challenges and growth. One small section restored, countless more to go. But they would face it together, 1 acre at a time, their shared purpose stronger than any force that tried to pull them apart. On a humid evening in Louisiana, standing in the mud they were working to save, they had found something neither had been searching for, a love as deep and vital as the coastline they were fighting to protect. And that was worth everything. The end.